An unsexy name, I just thought of one, is Walter.
I agree.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like I was trying to think of some other ones, and they all seem to be kind of more, it's like Stanley and like Frank, like things like that.
I had an aunt named Gertrude. It's kind of a harsh name.
Yeah, a little bit. Or the female names that were like the men's names, and they just added the like Benjamina, or like there's kind of like, I think that's all like, that's a little rough too, so.
This is the Mostly Middle Tennessee Business Podcast, a podcast about Middle Tennessee business owners and professionals.
Mostly. Okay, so what is the sexiest and least sexy name, in your opinion?
Well, this is a funny way to start for me, because that's probably the last question I thought you were going to ask me.
It's something we can pontificate on throughout the entire episode.
Yeah, I probably by the end I'll come up with some better answers. I feel like there's always names occasionally that you come upon that end up feeling like, oh, that's a stripper name. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. What is something funny that when you come across those names? And the unsexy, I think I'm going to need maybe till the end of the episode.
What is we have children, right?
Yes.
Did you have a process of naming them that specifically rejected stripper sounding names? Because I did.
I absolutely did.
Did you?
Yes.
What was your process?
Just when either of us brought a name up, it'd be like, nope, that one sounds like a stripper name, and we just vetoed it. And we ended up with 2 boys, so it ended up working out just fine.
Well, we had our first. We didn't know what we were having. Funny enough, there was on the actual paper when we got into the delivery room, I got a glimpse of the document that they put out, and then on it said male. And I'm like, son, okay. Now I'm going to honor our agreement. And I'm not going to tell my wife, but now I know I'm having a boy. Didn't dawn on me that they just had to write FE in front of it. So I guess they just populated it automatically. So we ended up having a girl, which is twice the surprise for me, because I was expecting a boy. But then we didn't have a name for her. So we went through, I'm like, okay, we'd come up with a name, and I'd go, gentlemen, welcome to the stage. And say the name. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't work. That was my process.
Yeah, I like that. We had some, my kids' names and my ex-husband, it's Rough Sedge. So we had some names that were kind of this alliteration sound that didn't work at all. Mm-hmm. And so we had to eliminate some names that way as well. So a little bit similar to yours, but not from a stage sounding, but just,
right.
The name got too long, or it got too many R's in there.
Usually it's like Sierra or something like that. Yeah. Mountain ranges. Yeah. So moving into it, we have Mrs. Laura Huston on the show today with Bell and Bottle. You've joined our B&I chapter recently. And this is, by the way, the Mostly Middle Tennessee Business Podcast. We're kind of switching things up on how we do things. A podcast for mostly Middle Tennessee business owners, entrepreneurs, and professionals, where we have real conversations that meander and go down rabbit holes, all sorts of stuff, but mainly talk about, the problems, the challenges, and the successes, failures, whatever may come up. So you moved here fairly recently. From where?
We moved about 3 years ago from the Seattle, Washington area.
Was that where you grew up?
No, I'm originally from Topeka, Kansas. So I kind of started in the heartland in the Midwest, smaller town, and I came to Vanderbilt for school. Mm-hmm. So I was here in Tennessee long enough ago. I'm not going to tell you the numbers. Right. And then went kind of Dallas, Atlanta, Seattle, so kind of hit some bigger cities. And then after the pandemic, really wanted to come back home here, where some family was and more had moved to back in this area.
See, I took you for somebody from being from California for some reason. Definitely from the West Coast.
Yeah, I don't know. I think just kind of been around enough in different locations. When I lived in Atlanta, I also worked a little bit in the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and then all over the South. And so I feel pretty good about, feeling out most of the country, and I don't know, feel like understanding maybe a little bit of how people live in different areas than people who haven't moved around the country as much as I have.
So Mid-Atlantic, Virginia, Maryland, those kinds of states?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were, I worked out of Atlanta, but I worked for a copier and printer company. So I worked for Sharp Electronics, and I had the Mid-Atlantic territories. So I traveled around in that area for probably about a year, a little over a year, before I moved back down to the South in the Southern territories.
And how did you get into all of this? What was your first foray into the wine business, essentially? So
I went from working in corporate America with the copier printer companies. So I feel like I had, this background of, kind of more corporate business, marketing and sales from that. And then when we moved out to the Seattle area, I had been doing some photography. Well, I had my first son, so I'd been doing my own business at home, doing some family portraiture. And I started doing some work for a chef out in Washington, and that's kind of how I got into the wine industry. So I was working at the restaurant doing wine dinners and other marketing projects for him, and then kind of got the wine bug. And when it was time to leave the restaurant, I decided instead of going to work for one winery, I wanted to continue working for myself and kind of work with a multitude of wineries to kind of bring that concept to people. In the printer business, was it kind of like an entrepreneur? Not really entrepreneur, but you were kind of like working for yourself in a way? In the printer business, I was not. I was working for the large corporation. So that was kind of right after school. So that's where I got kind of indoctrinated into what large corporations and how that looks and how that works. And then once I left to stay home with my son, because I traveled about 80% of the time. So when I had my son, I stayed home. So once I stayed home with him, that's when I started realizing that I was a person who needed a little bit more to do than just have him at home. And so an easy thing to do with a small child at home is to kind of work in that arena. And so I started doing some work for some of my friends and things like that. And that's how I got into the entrepreneurship. Did you, with the photography? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So getting into that, that was around what year, just for technology's sake? My son was born in 2001. So. Okay. So that was like, film cameras, I guess, were still big back then at that point. Yeah, I had a digital camera, so we were doing digital. That's when digital was like a freaking cost as much as a human body. Yeah. Yes. So we did definitely have digital, but there was a lot of, I don't know, I guess a lot of like post-processing work and a lot of other things that I was doing, which was a nice kind of tangent from when I worked for the copier and printer company. I worked with a lot of designers and people that dealt with that type of software. So that was kind of a fun way to kind of get into that, use a passion that I had for photography and then some of the skills that I had learned from that business. Did you do photography at any other part of your life? Or just something you've always wanted to try? And before that, it had been a hobby. So like I would take my camera with me on trips and take kind of landscape, and I love nature, and so I loved visiting national parks and things like that. And so in the past I had like gifted family some pictures that I had taken where we would blow it up and put it in a frame, but that was probably the extent of what I had done before I started doing the family portraiture. Right. And that was there was a learning curve when it came to photography back then, because I got into it a little bit, but it was so much easier to see the immediate result of what you just took, Even when I got into audio editing, I learned on reel-to-reel, analog, and learned how to cut and splice tape and everything. But I don't think I would have done what I did in radio if the digitization of the entire platform come to fruition. I just couldn't see it happening. It was amazing how just the technology advancement from that year on was just blinding. Yeah, I feel like from photography standpoint, because it was all digital editing, but I was still on that cusp, like you're talking about, where there were still some people, working in the dark rooms and learning that. So I think it would have actually been nice to learn a little bit of that, because I think it would have taught you a little bit more with photography skills if you're doing that additional post-processing. But again, kind of like, I don't know that I would have gone to all those lengths, to be into that. So I think having the access to be able to do that at home was kind of key for the situation that I was in with, having a small infant there.
So do you still use your photography skills in what you're doing now?
For sure.
Products and stuff like that?
Yeah. And I think, part of it, I feel like, when you start doing things, it's like your full-time job, then you kind of lose some of the passion for it. So I feel like, even with wine, there's between the wine and the photography and all, there's pieces of that like you get into it for the passion, but what you end up doing day to day is more mundane. And like, I'm shooting photos for Instagram or little video reels and trying to learn all of that piece of it, rather than just like, hey, I'm going on vacation, I'm taking my camera so I can capture some cool images. So I try to do that every now and again, just to kind of bring the joy back of that piece. But I do think it is helpful for what I do, because, the image, right, especially now, digital images this is how you're selling things. So
totally, with wine being poured into a glass and all those different things, the elements. I never really got into the innate study of wine, but I know what I like and I don't like, and certainly had a lot of samples over the years. So getting into that from how did you start what you're doing now? How did that come to fruition?
So when I first started working with this chef, I was really helping with his more, just marketing and I guess sales, if you will, for a restaurant. But a lot of it fell more into like my photography skills and what I could do for them to help kind of, he had some products he was trying to patent and create. So we started out doing that. And, when I guess the other piece is when we moved from Atlanta to Seattle area, we were specifically in Woodinville, Washington, and that's where all the wineries are. So Chateau Ste. Michelle started there in the 70s. And then as, the years passed, additional wineries kind of built up, and so became this area. And right now there's about 150 wineries that are located right in that immediate area. So it's kind of crazy. But I was working on the marketing, and they were doing a lot of wine dinners, events with wineries there. And I became really interested in that, more so than, in Atlanta, you're kind of getting whatever wine you get at the store and not really understanding all the intricacies. So being out there and getting to do these wine tastings with these boutique producers and really seeing the passion that all of these small producers had, that was really fascinating for me. And, wine is a topic that you can just, you're never going to learn it all.
Right.
And it's always going to keep changing. And so I think as it's something that, people enjoy sharing together and causes, creates community and, coming together around food and wine, that it's just really an industry that draws you in, as, all the people who are there because they're passionate about it. So
you follow Gary Vee by chance?
I do.
Did you watch him back in the day when he was doing, I don't know if it was Wine Library TV?
I've seen some clips recently where they're kind of doing a throwback of some of that, and then he's got some newer stuff now that he's doing. But I keep an eye on, like, I was listening to some of his marketing stuff. I think when it was however many years ago that he was kind of out of the wine business, mostly. I know he still had the family business, but the newer projects. And then in the last few years, he started some additional projects that now he's kind of back into the wine industry. So it's
wine
always
text, right?
Yeah. And he had a project Empathy before that he created, and then he already has sold that. So, but I just, people like that where they're kind of have their finger on the pulse. It's always nice to keep an eye on what they're doing and see how you can fit that into your business.
A wine podcast. that in the works for you? I know somebody who can help you.
We actually last year we started doing a few. One of the big focuses I have is female entrepreneurs, and so with our podcast, we had worked on the year before. So as I was moving to Tennessee, we did a wine awards, and it was for wineries to submit their wines just like you would for like Wine Enthusiast or one of those other competitions. And so we had an all-female panel of judges.
Mm-hmm.
And when we did all of the, I guess, panel to figure out who was going to actually be on the wine judging panel, we got all of their submissions of like, here's my background, here's my expertise. And I was just completely blown away by some of the credentials and all of the work that had been put in for that. And so last year we kind of took those pieces and we turned it into wine from the female perspective. And so we started talking to different women in the wine industry about their background and just kind of hearing more about their stories and how that fits into the overall picture of wine, while women are still, there's a lot of women. Obviously, the majority of people who drink wine are women. A lot of people who work in the industry are women, but a lot of people at the top of the industry or people who own businesses in the industry are not. It's still a low percentage of women in those roles. And so we really wanted to highlight that. So we have a few done, and then now we're kind of paused while we regroup here in Tennessee and figure out, what our next steps are. So,
well, I mean, especially a business podcast for female entrepreneurs here locally, why not? You're having a glass of wine during the episode.
Yes.
I will say that being a part of Mike Mercurio, who's in our chapter, he and I do another podcast called the Ales and Tales Podcast. Check it out. Where we do beer, right? Okay. You can only batch 3 episodes at a time. Because
is that third one pretty funny?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We always set it up at the end. I'm like, okay, this is the 3rd episode. So this is where it starts getting really loose.
Yeah. That's funny.
You do, so revamping it and relaunching it is hopefully, is that something that you guys already did? Maybe having like the female entrepreneur angle and then wine tasting or indulging aspect of it?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of kind of like, what we're doing here today. It's a little different feel to be able to do it in person and a little more fun. And when, right now, a lot of the people that I had interviewed is, we're doing it long distance. And so it kind of changes the feel of that. So I think, just kind of looking at I think part of what it is just how do I branch it out a little bit more so that it doesn't feel just like you need to be in the industry to want to listen to it, because I think like you said, there's nuggets for everybody. There's nuggets for entrepreneurs. There's nuggets for people who just like wine and want to learn a little bit more.
Well, I think there's an allure to that, especially in that space where you're having business conversations or something like this, where it meanders, whatever comes up may come up. There's, dare I say, not really a roadmap to what I do. It's just kind of having a loose, a casual conversation. But, when you lube it up with wine, it makes it very interesting because you can also showcase the wine and showcase all the things that you do with bell and bottle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I like that.
Yeah. So you're not exactly you guys aren't doing your own wine. You said you mentioned white labeling some of them, but you're basically curating a collection of wines that you endorse. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I think curation is a word that I really like because I feel like people can understand that when you think about, art and you have somebody who has some expertise in that and they help you pick what you want for your house or whatever your needs are. And I feel like that fits really well with wine. There's so many different styles, varieties and things that people a lot of times don't know exactly what they want, but they can help guide you. And so using, some cues and things from, this is what I like to drink, this is the style I like, whatever those things are, to then start kind of opening up their, what I would recommend to them and giving them some more options. I think that creates the fun for them. And in terms of, the labeling, we have a few projects that we have done over the past few years. So right now, I think we've had only 2 or 3 I usually don't do that. A lot of the bigger, like the wine clubs and the wine shipping services, they do a lot of white labeling, and I don't even like that word because a lot of times that connotates like I'm getting, kind of this bulk leftover that I'm putting my own label on.
Right.
And what we've done is really work with these boutique producers. So a lot of the people we work with in Washington State, in other states, and then small importers. They're working on really small projects. So it's family-owned, female-led projects, and they're very special. And they could, one of them that we have that we were talking about before we started, that's called Huston Heart, was a wine that I had sold at the wine shop I had in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And had really good feedback on it always. And my friend who makes the wine, he got extra wine, or extra juice that year from the grapes. And he just said, I don't want to make this many under my label. Do you want to do some label of your own? And that's when, we kind of pulled in the Hustle and Heart to, in honor of the female entrepreneurs. That part of the proceeds for that wine now will go to with our foundation. So that was something nice. And some other things, really just for targeting certain things, we'll do that. But the rest of it is curated from these smaller wineries. And I think just kind of wrap that up, I always just say, I don't really need to ever go, people are like, oh, do you want to make your own wine? And it's like, at this point, I know so many people who make fantastic wine that I feel like my job is really like, how do I help support all of us by selling more of their wine for them? It doesn't necessarily need to be, something different from me.
So coming here to Tennessee with Bell and Bottle and B&I, what is it typically you're looking for as you ask us for referrals and such? Events, things of that nature?
Yeah. So one of the things right now that I think, again, just knowing that the portfolio of wines that I have access to compared to what I see at a lot of the locations here physically they're more unique. They're really great wines, and I'm getting a different variety than people are going to be able to get by themselves here. So a couple of the ways that we can kind of work with that is somebody wants to have an event and they want to have some really fun wines or fit into a theme or do anything like that. I can pull in, my expertise of, the knowledge of all of those things and give them something that they're not going to, like nobody else is going to be able to have that same type of experience from that. And that could also present itself as, anybody in professional services like finance, home, mortgages, realtors, things like that we can curate these really great gifts.
It's like you're a wine agent.
I like that.
Like a wine talent agent.
Yes, I like that.
You're the Ari Gold of the wine industry.
One of my clients in Washington, I have one of the wine clubs that we have is just sparkling wines. And so it always has a champagne and then two other sparkling wines like a Prosecco or whatever. And so I would deliver their wines to them because I would see them they were actually realtors. And so we'd like meet up or whatever. And so they'd always call me the champagne fairy because I'd come with a gift. So,
what's funny is, the emergence of, I guess, the next step in the evolution of what we now know as the boxed wine. We started seeing those a couple of years ago. My wife and I, like, for some reason, my mother always had the boxed Franzia, and it was always sitting on the either in the refrigerator or maybe on a counter or something like that. And it always had a kind of a vibe that went with it. I'm trying to think of the word. Basically,
a get drunk vibe.
Not that. It was just like it was boxed wine. It had some sort of it wasn't exactly bottled wine. It didn't have the bouginess, if you will.
Yes.
But now they're everywhere, and it's like my wife and I are like, why? We never wanted to drink the Franzia stuff because it was like it was associated with something. But yet we buy the Boda boxes and all that stuff. We have no problem doing that. Isn't that weird?
Well, I can see how you might feel it's weird, but I think that the cool thing is that wine companies really right now, wine sales are down because people are being more health conscious. There's a lot more options.
Is it not healthy?
No, people think that it's not, but is this whole thing, like the alcohol industry, we're not allowed to say that wine is healthy or it's good for you or whatever. And so I think, it's a natural product. And when you're looking at, of all of the things with alcohol, like to me, obviously it's my favorite, but I think there's a lot of benefit to offset that. And so there's this real struggle right now of like, how do you talk about it? How do you compete with a seltzer that's like, I have a 80 calorie seltzer, even though it's full of a bunch of crap.
Right.
So where is that messaging? And I think one of the great things that I hope we'll start to see more of is people kind of fixing or coalescing that messaging around some of these other products where like the boxed wine is great because they're doing it for sustainability reasons. So like most of the carbon footprint for making wine comes in the glass and transporting the glass from place to place because of the weight. And so one of the things that people who are, being inventive are like, okay, let's put it in a box, let's put it in a bag, let's put it in a can so you can take it hiking. Let's take how do we really get wine away from, I have to hold my little pinky finger up and be snooty about it and, tell you all these things, to how can this wine go with me everywhere? Like, I want to take it to the ball game. I want to take it hiking. I want to take it to the pool. So I think that's some of the things you'll start to see. And there's some even cooler kind of boxed wine, I think, coming on its way too.
Really?
Yeah, really like higher end premium stuff. So
more than, because every box is like $20. And you get a lot of value out of that $20, which is mainly, for us, the reason why we will buy it. And maybe we'll put it away in one night. But it's just interesting because to your point, you're actually seeing a lot more Facebook, Instagram pictures on, redneck Riviera beaches with wine glasses in their hand while watching the sunset, Yeah. So I think that's happening.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it has to happen because, the way that wine is sold, up until a few years ago is how baby boomers drink wine, and it's that like I'm buying an expensive bottle and I have to put it in my cellar and I have to do all these certain things or I'm not a real wine person. And now it's really, how do you break all those molds and talk to all the
next
people.
generation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what's important to the next generation is, sustainability. How do you, it's a more natural product for their bodies. And they want to hear the stories behind the wine. And so that's part of the other thing with kind of working with these small boutique producers, whether it's here or, internationally, is there's a really good story to be told. There's, generations of families who work on these properties that, they're farming the vineyards and they're doing all of these things. And it's, they're really great stories. And you don't get that with, Budweiser or, White Claw.
There's actually we had an experience, my wife and I, back in October. We had an opportunity to go out to California. Landed at San Luis Obispo and then went up to Paso Robles. And one of the things that they were able to do was go on a formal wine tasting. And it was at the Hope Family Winery. I don't know if that rings a bell.
I haven't been there.
But, when you're accustomed to drinking boxed wine, like us cave people are, you get a good bottle of wine, you can immediately tell the difference. Like, Courtney and I were like, she's grown up more in a wine appreciating family, especially reds, than mine did. I was more of a white Zinfandel. That's what my mother drank all the time. I wasn't much of a wine person, more of a beer guy, so on and so forth. But actually having a very formal sit down explanation, like to your point, the stories behind the wines, I had no idea what the significance of the years meant, and they had a 2015 or a 2016 that they brought out. And they're like, well, during this year, it was really dry and there wasn't much rain and therefore blah, blah, stress levels went. And I'm like, I had no flipping idea. It was so eye-opening. Yeah. And that first bottle of wine was by far our favorite bottle. And then they went up the line, 2016, 2017. And they kept on bringing it back and say, well, taste the first wine in comparison to this one. But dude, when you're 2 hours in and you've had nothing but wine, after a while, you're like, I looked at the girl and I said, listen, it's all starting to taste alike. We're beyond differentiating and discerning between these classes. But is that typical for a wine tasting to go on that long? It was a sales pitch for sure, but you know.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's a little long there.
It was like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's no. I would say like 60 minutes to 90 minutes for a lot of those more formal sit down.
Yeah.
And you know, but they're, you know, like you said, their job is to try and get you a little, like, not so drunk that you forget that you have your wallet, but like tipsy enough that your wallet, you know, becomes a little looser with your credit card. Correct. Absolutely.
Now, do you work here? Have you explored some of the local wineries here yet?
I have just been to Arrington.
Really?
I have not been. We were actually talking about, there's a couple other places. I feel like the smaller ones are a little bit further out. And so I just need to kind of set aside some time and make a point to do that. I did talk with there's a Tennessee association for all of the wineries. And I did kind of meet with them and talk with them when I first got here. And I have another project event that I'm working with the Les Dames group in Nashville. And they had reached out, part of that had reached out to, I think, the association or some of the wineries, and they're interested in kind of circling back. So I think hopefully we'll get in touch with them soon.
What was the name of the group? Les Dames?
Les Dames.
Les Dames.
So,
that's a sexy name.
That is a good name. I'd already forgotten. I have homework for the end of this. I got to bring it back. Yeah, no kidding.
An unsexy name, I just thought of one, is Walter.
I agree. Yeah. I kind of feel like I was trying to think of some other ones, and they all seem to be kind of more, it's like Stanley and like Frank, like things like that.
I had an aunt named Gertrude. It's kind of a harsh name.
Yeah, a little bit. Or the female names that were like the men's names, and they just added the like Benjamina, like kind of like, I think that's all like, that's a little rough too, so.
Does your garage door sound like this? If it does, it's screaming for help. Call Incredible Doors, 931-348-DOOR. We're making garage doors in Murray and Williamson counties work better and sound better. We just make them incredible again. Go to IncredibleDoors.com or call 931-348-DOOR. Follow us on Facebook for specials on maintenance visits, keypads, and other items. 931-348-DOOR. IncredibleDoors.com.
What was your upbringing like in Topeka, Kansas? I mean, did you ever anticipate, hey, if you go back to tell yourself when you were a little girl that you're like, I'm going to be like this wine expert?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that would have been it. You know, when you're talking about your family, like my family didn't really drink that much at all. And so that wasn't ever really anything that was, I would have even thought of as a profession, I guess. I think, you know, where we were, Topeka is the capital of Kansas, even though a lot of people don't know that. So a little shout out there for those of you who need a little capital geography.
Kansas is, I think, so there's a point in Kansas that is the center of the country.
Correct.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, and we're pretty close to that. And there's also the largest ball of twine if you want to stop on the highway someplace. Because somebody I was just talking to told me that they had just passed that sign not too long ago. I had forgotten.
And I believe that when you do cross the state line, there is a faint sound of Carry On Wayward Son that plays, right?
Very nice. Yes.
That's me attempting to be funny.
I like it.
Much like in B&I where I try to do it and I bomb every single time. It's awful.
Well, we can all keep trying.
That I do, and I fail all the time, but you know.
Yeah. No, I feel like I loved my upbringing there. It was a small enough town. You had the small town feel, but not so small. Like when we'd go visit I had great grandparents that were from Winchester, Kansas. And it's like, the size of there's no street lights or anything there. And, that's great again to visit. But I think as a kid, like having a little bit more was great.
What was your first experience of like, oh, wow, this is different than Topeka? Was it when you moved, or were you still in Kansas when you went to college in Vanderbilt?
Yeah, well, I was, but we actually moved when I was in elementary school for 1 year. My aunt was out in Pebble Beach, California, so we moved out to California for a little while, and we were in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then we went back to Kansas. And so I feel like even just that experience as a child, to kind of see that there's different places and different opportunities, and that, again, nothing is like this is right and that's wrong, but just there's different places. And, moving out to be near the ocean, I loved that. And there was also this kind of sense of security about, being in Kansas and what that, that feeling of that town gave. And I think I had a very, I don't know that typical is, I don't want to call it typical in a bad way, but just a great, like, my high school was a great high school. I played sports, I did academic stuff, and, so I did all of the things there that I decided were important to try to set me up to be able to leave. I had decided I wanted to leave to go to college. And so that I did the things I needed to do to make that happen. And I ended up at Vanderbilt, and, and then that's a completely different, experience. And, coming from small town Kansas to a school where a lot of the kids, were very wealthy and had, parents with famous last names and different things like that, but you still find, even in those opportunities, I think you still find the people that you connect with.
Oh yeah.
And give you kind of that same sense of, security and, happiness or love or whatever it is that, you're getting from friendships, and, still have a lot of friends from that today.
When did you see the ocean for the first time? And what ocean?
Probably, I think when we were little, we used to travel. We had family from my dad's side in Florida. Actually, my mom too. So I had more family in Florida. So I think that was probably the first time that I saw the ocean.
Yeah.
But
was it the Gulf or the Atlantic?
It would have been the Atlantic.
Yeah.
So like Orlando side.
Yeah. That would be the Port Canaveral, that area.
Yeah.
It's funny because, in Kansas, you are landlocked. Dead center.
For sure.
Yeah. But even Pebble Beach, I didn't see the Pacific for the first time till I was 25 or 26.
Yeah.
Growing up in Connecticut, we saw the ocean quite a bit. So we weren't landlocked.
Yeah.
But we were in Connecticut,
Yeah. And they're definitely, they're way different, right? They're, what you do at the beach in Florida, what, in California. And then what I will say is when we moved to Seattle, we decided that I think that first summer we were taking the kids to the beach, and we went to Oregon, and I kept checking because I was like, I don't really understand, what am I supposed to do at the beach if it's 65?
Yeah.
And
up there, it's not really beach weather.
And it wasn't, but what was funny is like the day we left, it was like up in the 80s, and then that would have been a little bit more what you were used to. But I remember I even called the front desk at the hotel, and I just said, can you help me out a little bit? Like, am I supposed to plan on the kids playing at the, I couldn't even comprehend what that was like. And then after living there for, we were there for like 15 years, but, now you just know it's just different stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine. And it's great. And it's still beautiful and wonderful. It's just not the same that you're used to.
It is gorgeous because you see it in Twilight movies, and it was in the Goonies as well, I believe, some of the Oregon coast. But the water doesn't start getting remotely warm, I want to say even south of San Diego, because it's circulating from Alaska on down and hitting all the states. Whereas in the Atlantic, it's flowing southerly from a southern point up north. That's why you have beach, Maryland. We used to go to Ocean City, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to the beach there in May and be fine.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think, now taking my kids back to Monterey, to the beach there that we used to go to as a kid, I have no idea how I actually swam in that water because I can't even put my toe in without putting a wetsuit on. And, my kids are in there jumping, people are in there, but it's definitely freezing cold water.
Have you been to like Cabo or anything like that?
Mm-hmm.
Is it warmer there?
I don't know. We actually couldn't even get in the water in Cabo because it had like red flag warnings the whole time with like, you know, the undertows and everything. And so we ended up spending the time at the beach. So I only went once to Cabo. That wasn't my favorite.
Shall I ask why?
Well, between that and I got like the worst, you know,
Did you have
food
Montezuma's
poisoning. Yes, so whatever you want to call it.
You drank the water?
No, I didn't. But I ate food off of property from the resort that we stayed at one night. And
that'll do it. And
I did not drink as much tequila as all the rest of the people in the party. So I think they drank enough tequila to kill whatever they ate, and I didn't. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. But but it was pretty miserable. So I have not. That was like 20-something years, like 22 years ago, 23 years ago, and I have not gone back to Mexico since because I decided it wasn't worth it.
Right. You got to stay on the resorts.
Yeah.
Pretty much. We went to Cancun once. That was fun. We should go back at some point, but until that happens, with the Paso Robles experience, it really kind of, I mean, whenever we have a good bottle of wine, you could tell the difference from the box stuff. And it actually piqued my interest to kind of learn more about it. But my latest thing, in addition to, you know, of course, all these healthy interests that I'm acquiring, we've become even more bougie about our beer, you know, and appreciating the tastes thanks to the Ales and Tales podcast. But lately, and it's because one of my buddies comes here and does a podcast called The Rich Redmond Show. Check it out. Every time we're done, he's like, hey, you want a nip? And I go, at the time, I wasn't really a big whiskey person. But, you know, for some reason I said, okay, yeah, let's do it. You know, so we put a couple things in a glass and I'm like, you know, I've had whiskey before. It's never really been my thing, but I'm kind of getting it now. I understand it. Now it's like a thing. Like, are you big into whiskey at all or any of the brown waters?
I would say probably not big into it, but I definitely pay attention. And I think, you know, just like you said with wine and kind of understanding the appreciation of, you know, those types of settings where you can go and do a tasting and somebody can teach you some things. Here, I've gone to a few places and we went to the Uncle Nearest facility. They have a phenomenal tour. And that was really fun. I learned a lot from that.
Where is that?
In Shelbyville.
Shelbyville?
Shelbyville.
So
I think it's less syllables than I'm saying, but I can't do it any less than that.
Everything gets truncated down. So what is it called again? I never even heard of it.
Uncle Nearest.
Never heard of it. I know Jack Daniels, but never.
Yeah. So the story is that the guy that taught Jack Daniels to make the product was Nearest Green. Mm-hmm. And so this lady, Faye, and I just forgot her last name, she kind of dug up this story and was reading about it. And it was a black gentleman. And so they wanted the Nearest Green. And so she wanted to kind of like resurrect this story because over time it had just gotten buried that like he taught Jack Daniels how to make that because the guy who took Jack Daniels and grew it, you know, kind of took over the story of Tennessee whiskey, right? And so she's like, hey, I just came across this. I really want to bring this back to life. And so she found, I think it's his great-granddaughter or granddaughter, and she's now the distiller there, the lady who makes that. So they kind of weave the story in with prohibition and in with kind of this, it was all at the time of like the women's suffrage movement. And so they have this whole story and they kind of weave it through. And it was just really coming from, that was one of the things that, you know, I've done so many wine tastings and I've gone to Napa and I've gone to all these places where they do these like extravagant, beautiful tastings, and the storyline and what they talked about and how they set that up from a hospitality standpoint was like perfectly on point, and I was super impressed. And then we've gone a couple other places. We went to the Nelson's Greenbrier, which is downtown, and so I like doing that. And I feel like when you go, you get a little bit of that story, and I think that's part of, you know, that's what sells it for me. And then you're also getting somebody who's an expert who's teaching you something. Like when you taste whiskey, make sure you do it in this fashion. And then you can tell, and all of a sudden, like extra aromas and different things open up for you
The
that
notes.
you may not have appreciated before.
Yeah.
And, and I think there's people who do that they do that for coffee. They do that for all kinds of things. And so I think it's something, talking about health, these are things that actually are really healthy for your brain. So it's like for you to be able to sit down and like think about all of the notes and things that you're tasting. And so I think it's just fun to, have people choose, what is the thing that interests them? Is it craft beer? Is it whiskey? Is it wine? Is it coffee? And just like kind of immerse yourself in that a little bit and learn some more and kind of experience all of those, the sense, the taste, use all of your senses. So
There's in the beer podcast, you can hear just how naive I am, because Mercurio he's got a palate that is off the charts. He can detect stuff. Literally, I'll be going, oh yeah. Because I can't, like the origination of it, for me to tell people what I'm tasting, I'm like, I don't know. It tastes fruity. Maybe like an orange, maybe a little bit like a something else or whatever. And I just, and then just when it comes to the pairings, they all laugh at me because I'm like, I have these ridiculous pairings. I'm like, I could see this, with a pretzel and mustard. And they're like, are you out of your mind? I'm like, I'm the idiot. So
I think you should try that and see how it tastes, because I think that's how you figure it out, right?
yeah,
But I think, a good point of what you said, when, people, particularly with wine, right? Like with beer, people, if you don't know how to talk about wine, most people aren't going to judge you or you feel dumb about it. You're just like,
that's
I don't
changed
drink
too.
enough wine,
Yeah.
or as much beer. But I think with wine, it's always this, people are so afraid, I'm still even intimidated in rooms with all these experts, like to speak up, because it's like, maybe I don't know all the stuff that they know, but I think one of the things that I always try to share, and when we do these events, like we're talking about, like say a company wants to do a team building, or you want to just have your friends over, is really just how do you make it so that you feel comfortable enough, to buy a bottle at the store, to order a bottle at the restaurant, and then talk about it. And the biggest thing, people are always afraid to say anything. And the first thing I'm always like, do you like it or do you not like it? Like, this is the most important part. And then if you like it, why do you like it? And then let's talk about that. And then as you kind of talk through, I think people start to feel more comfortable. And I still never, there's the wine tasting, there's like a aromas wheel, and there's like, 50, 100 different things that are on there that you can taste. Nobody can taste everything. And I can tell over time, there's certain areas, like I'm very sensitive to certain areas. So if wine has a lot of oak in it, I don't like it, but some people love that because it maybe is not overpowering for them. But I think just having that kind of comfort level of, how do you talk about it and how do you walk people through? And I think a lot of it is just like the experts have been trained over time to pick up certain things. But if you didn't know that, you wouldn't know, and then some of the stuff in there is like, oh, this has aromas of gooseberry. Well, like, do we know what that means? Like, I don't even, I didn't know.
I didn't know there was a gooseberry.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Because that's a thing that they talk about in Europe. And whoever wrote these initial tasting notes and charts, it's very like white European centric based. And so when you start talking about, okay, I have this other wine from another region around the world, like we don't have gooseberry, or we don't pair wine with this type of food because it's a completely different, like we had a lady at one of our tastings and she was just talking about like her heritage is African. And so where she cooks, like all the food that she cooks, that's like native to her family and her heritage. She had to come up with all these different like food and wine pairings because all of the typical ones were very, just centered on basic foods. And so we have to start being really like, how do you incorporate, like this is spicy food, this is, all these different options, and trying to show people, again, just how to put that together without being intimidating.
Have you been to Italy, France, and everything like that?
I have been, but I have been there before I really got into wine. So that's kind of on my list. my husband is from the country of Georgia. So the last few times that we've done, bigger trips, instead of going to Europe, we've gone back to see his family. And Georgia is the birthplace of wine.
Really?
Yeah.
Did
So
not know that.
wine originated in Georgia. They have like whatever dating systems that they've done on like components. So I don't remember if it was the actual like clay pot or like little like seeds left over, but basically dated it back 8,000 years. And so a lot of, there's some other places like Israel and Armenia that they have that people will kind of argue about, I was first. No, I was first. But since I have ties to Georgia, we're just going to go with that Georgia's first. And their winemaking is really unique. And so he had imported some wines from Georgia as well. And so those are always fun to kind of introduce to people. They're completely different. There's like over 500 varietals of grapes that are indigenous to there that we've never even heard of. And most of them we can't pronounce. And so that's kind of a fun, thing to share with people. And so anyway, my travels have been a little more focused on that lately. I am working on partnering to do some tours in Italy. And then also we're looking at doing some in Georgia for next year in 2026.
Is that something that Bell and Bottle does as well? Touring some wineries and regions for people?
So one of the things that I've always done with my wine club members is that if anybody is going to wine regions and they wanted some advice about wineries to visit or any kind of, tips and tricks for the region, that we're happy to kind of help share some information with them on that. And then just in this last, year or two is when we started working with kind of looking at some travel agents and things that we could partner with, so we can kind of take that, again, more personal feel when you look at, like, instead of a big winery, we're looking at, we have boutique partners. And so we would take a smaller group, so it would feel more like, you go, like when I go to Georgia, I'm staying with his family and seeing, this is how Georgians, what's going on from a local standpoint. And so we wanted that to feel like that for, taking people to different regions as well. And I think it's always nice to have those recommendations from people. And then now, potentially having these small groups tours.
The Italy is definitely a destination that is on the list for us.
Yes.
It's the food there must be amazing. I'm a huge Italian food person.
Yes, and I think that the biggest thing right now is since the pandemic that Italy has been on the list for everyone, and
really?
So it's just the prices have kind of gotten crazy, and like a lot of the places are really packed. And so one of the things, the chef that I'm working with for the Italy tours, he's from Italy, but he's from Maremma, which is a smaller subregion of Tuscany that's not as popular. And the funny thing, as we're talking about, like, how do we, share with people, because this may be a part of Tuscany they haven't heard of, or there's not as many wineries that ship wine to the U.S., then all of a sudden I'm seeing, like, here's a wine enthusiast article about this region. And so they're kind of just like the U.S., it's like when busy spots start to fill up, people start kind of spilling out into the other places and discovering more things. And as they're discovering, they're, realizing how cool, these other spots are. And
it's
so
like
I think
everyone moving to Nashville.
Exactly.
Yeah, everyone's spilling over to Columbia and Lewisburg now. So you have all price points, I would imagine, that you can meet the needs, I would think, or is there a specific bracket that you stick to?
Well, with the wine clubs, we kind of have two tiers that we kind of look at. Like, I always say, like, a lot of times, like, what's at the grocery store, if you kind of just like take the stuff at the grocery store and you kind of move that off to the side, a lot of that is just, very mass produced wines, and there's no need for me to, deal with any of that. But in terms of price point, like, that's kind of like sub $20. Then you look at kind of that $20 to $35 wine, like a mid-range, and then around $50. So we have two clubs that we kind of focus on those wines in there, because you can find some really unique wines, unique stories. And then as you get to that kind of $50 level, when you start looking at some of these particularly domestic producers, the smaller ones, that's about a good sweet spot for them where, when you're making something in a lot smaller quantity, it's going to cost more. And so that lets people, really sample what they're doing. And, but it's still nice enough. Like it lays down in the cellar. So some of it you can drink, right away with decanting, and some of it you can save for 10 or 20 years and you're fine. And, just in general, like if somebody calls me and they said, hey, I just, I'm a financial advisor and I need a gift for somebody, and they just did like some huge deal and they really want to make it special. If you want, $200 or $300 bottle of champagne, we can get that for you. So, I mean, the answer to your question is yes, we can pretty much do everything. And then, with certain projects, we will, target in on certain price ranges because it seems to fit more needs, but we definitely have access to everything.
So I said, when we made the arrangements to have you come on, I said, hey, feel free to bring a bottle of wine. And of course, I wanted to make sure that, I thank you for the gift. What is, you asked me a couple of questions. Is that typically your process, with those who are semi-familiar with wine?
Yeah, I think that, the biggest thing is that I don't want to, if I just assume that you like red wine and I show up and you're just a person who only drinks Chardonnay or you only drink Sauvignon Blanc, then that's not going to be a really cool gift for you. So I think, just to kind of, I try not to ask too many questions and make it too invasive, but just in general is like, hey, if you drink wine, is it normally, like, are you drinking big, bold reds, or do you, because some people, like, particularly Washington is very, a lot of it is, it's a fuller, bolder style. And because of, the climate and all the things that we have there. And some people, it's like, I like Pinot Noir, but if I go to Washington, and like most people, because they're used to drinking Washington wine, if I give them a Pinot Noir, they kind of look at me funny because they think that's too light and they don't like it. And so I noticed that different regions, people have different preferences. And so I try to at least just kind of hit in the right general direction. And a lot of the times, again, kind of going back to that discovery piece and exploration, which is my favorite part, is trying to surprise somebody. So, you said, I like Merlot, and so I brought you something that's not Merlot, but it's like it's a red blend, but I think it'll kind of fit the profile that you were talking about. And so it's fun because it gives you something new. You can try it. And then, particularly with white wine, I feel like a lot of people I don't like white wine. I don't like Chardonnay. I only like, there's certain things that people get very stuck on. And so it's fun to, if they say, I like this, then I give them something kind of adjacent to that to say, like, well, if you like this, I think you'll like this. Why don't you give it a try? And I also think, it helps give them more options, but also shows them that, I kind of know a little bit of what I'm talking about. And so they can come back and have me help, with some other things later on too.
So the one you brought is a Simpatico Cellars. Looking on the back, it's from Woodinville, Washington, so right in your former backyard. Is that near where you used to live?
Yes.
Really?
The wineries are all about like 20 minutes from the house. Most of them, so the grapes are all grown in Eastern Washington, but the population has always been in the Seattle area. And
right.
So when the initial decision was made from Chateau Ste. Michelle, they opened up their property in the Woodinville area. And then because they were such a force to be reckoned with, from a Washington wine standpoint, they already were drawing, I don't know, I can't speak to the 70s if you're drawing crowds in the 70s, but you're drawing attention. And so as the years went on in like the 80s and 90s, then all of these smaller wineries start popping up. And so they really started in like these warehouse areas, which I've looked around here and we don't really have, like, there's a couple breweries that maybe are in little warehouse areas, but out there you have all these wineries that are in areas together. And so then people can just like go to that area, and then you've got all these options to just kind of walk around and taste wine. So it's kind of like a shopping mall for wine, which is
nice.
Pretty cool.
So this particular blend, is it called the Boss?
Yes.
Is it like the Boss or the Boss?
It's, I guess the story behind this, so Simpatico itself is three friends who went to a Seattle wine school together. And one of the gentlemen that works, or is one of the owners, I worked with him at another winery as kind of his day job. And so that's how I got to know him really well. And so when they started this project, he was helping me actually with my Bell and Bottle launch party and pouring the other wine. And this particular Simpatico concept or winery, they had just released their white wines. They didn't even have their red wines yet. And so he's like, hey, I want you to come try this. And so he had some kind of hidden behind the table, and we tried it and we talked about his project. And so I've gotten to know them really well, the rest of them. So there's two gentlemen and a lady, and they are co-owners. And the boss itself is kind of an ode to their teacher. Mm-hmm. And it basically is kind of that, the joke about the kitchen sink wine where you have, you might have a Cabernet project or whatever that's going into all these other individual bottlings, and then you have some leftover juice and you have to figure out what to do with it. And the reason that I brought you this is one that I do, events myself. And then I also have, where we send people will order, if they're having a wedding or anything like that, they want to order wine. This is one where it's always a crowd pleaser. So there's certain wines where it's like kind of polarizing, and some people will like it and some people won't. And then there's wines that you find that just almost anybody who tastes the wine really like it. And this is always one of those. And, one of their goals based on his knowledge of the wine industry was to really just hit a certain price point and be affordable. And I think they've done a really good job of that. And so it's one of those, it's kind of a staple in my, portfolio that I pull out. So.
And Hustle and Heart, how did that come about?
Hustle and Heart is the label that I came up with. I was actually listening to, it was like a Zoom seminar during, I think it was either during the pandemic or right after the pandemic. And it was it was all female entrepreneurs. I forget the name of the group now. Oh, Self-Made. Mm-hmm. And Britt, who did some Pinterest, I believe. And so she had people on, and somebody was talking, and they were just talking about something with female entrepreneurs and just entrepreneurship in general. And they were like, it's the hustle and the heart. And so I just wrote it down in my notebook. I have a little file that I keep ideas for names for wine bottles or brands or little things like that. And so I put it in there. And when my friend had the extra wine that we talked about earlier for the for his wine club, and he asked if I wanted to get some of those bottles, I said yes. And then I kind of went into design mode to hire somebody to kind of come up with what I wanted the concept of that to look like. And then the great thing about that project is 30% of the sale of the wine goes to the foundation. So,
And the foundation benefits female entrepreneurs?
Yes.
Like you got scholarships, or what is it that you do? Help fund businesses?
Yeah. So what I found is in the wine industry, most of the things that I was looking at as a business owner were providing scholarships for education. And one of the things that I always found interesting is, that's great. And obviously we can all continue to learn, and that helps our businesses. But sometimes you just need somebody, like, I just need help. I need resources. I need funding. I need PR and marketing. I need those kind of things that are really tangible, that really can help kind of step it to the next level. And so that's where we went to focus with this. So instead of, you can apply for a grant or whatever from all these other organizations, if you want to go back and you want to get schooling, or you want to go and be a winemaker in Australia or whatever, they'll send you and do all of these things. What we wanted to do is really focus in the areas as a side, or just kind of back up. Venture capital funding, women receive less than 2% of venture capital funding. So when these companies go, women have better success rates and make more money than the male-owned businesses, but they don't get the venture capital. And most of the venture capital that they do get, so say that 2%, it's going to like technology, or there's a lot of like FinTech stuff going on right now. And those aren't industries that relate to anything that we're doing. So what we really wanted to do was focus on businesses such as hospitality. So it doesn't have to be wine, but it could be a restaurant, a chef, a farmer, anything like that, to where you're looking at kind of that food and beverage sector, and additionally, like anything within the community. And most of those businesses, where you're looking at kind of impacting the community, like restaurants really, draw people in and kind of build that sense of community. So people who are working in that space, most likely they're not going to get any funding. And so we wanted to really kind of jump in and help them out. So
very cool. And of the moment, or maybe what is your always a go-to bottle of wine for yourself, or maybe of the moment right now?
I would say always, I think for me, I love Chardonnay. And a lot of people have this love-hate with Chardonnay. And there's a thing in wine called ABC, and it's not already been chewed gum. It's anything but Chardonnay. And so people who have this impression of that, and they don't like it and they won't try it. And kind of like Merlot was from the movie Sideways. Like, I think we're kind of coming out of that as well. But there was just this thing that people just had in their mind and they wouldn't even try it, and which I think is funny. But so at home, I think I drink probably more white wine if it's just me. And then, if we have a party or do something, I love, opening up, we have a whole room now, which is great because we actually bought this house here knowing that, like, when I was in Seattle, I knew I never wanted to stay permanently. And so I kind of never did anything permanent here. We installed a whole wine room. So I have a whole wall of a wine rack wall. That's hard to say. And it has 320 some bottles of wine on the wall. And so it's really fun to have it all on display and be able to see and share it with people. So when people come over, then we can go in and pick out wine and talk about, what do you like, and, pick a different region. But I think for me, I would just say, I get my fill of, Washington wines, and we have a lot of things that we try there. So when it's kind of me, I've got some stuff that's like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. It's a little bit lighter,
nice,
elegant.
And people can find you bellandbottle.com.
Yes, and it's Bell with an E, so BELLE and bottle.com.
Think Beauty and the Beast. Bell.
Yes, exactly.
Belle of the Ball. So everything there is, and they could find out all more about you if they want to reach out to you to ask about wines or plan some events or gifting, that kind of thing. Everything's right there, right?
Yes, everything's there, and there's some contact information. So any of the event bookings, or even if you're not here to where you want me to physically help with wine, I'm happy to help with some pairings for any event you have coming up, and we can get that to you as well.
What events do you have coming up, if any?
We actually have a great event coming up in May that we are working on that's called Made by Her. And so we're focused on all of the products that will be showcased will be made by women. So we'll do female winemakers, female distillers, chefs, and then some musicians there. And the event will be held in Franklin at Harbor and Union on May 17th in the evening. And we want everyone to come out. So it's for everyone to enjoy. So bring your spouse, bring your friends, bring whoever with you. But just kind of giving a little shout out to some ladies making some good products that we want to showcase.
Very cool. Well, there you go. All the details will be in the description, especially the website bellandbottle.com. And of course, mmtbp.com if you want to share with your friends. Sometimes I say find and follow, but if you listening up to this point, you've already found us. All the previous episodes are there as well. And if you want to apply to be on the show, there's a link there that you can click on and fill out, and we'll review it and reach out to you, especially if you're a mostly Middle Tennessee entrepreneur, business professional, or one of those types of people. So
just mostly Middle Tennessee.
It's because sometimes I get people that reach out from, let's say, Tacoma. Like, hey, I'd be a great guest. And okay, great. Where in Middle Tennessee are you? Oh, I'm not in Middle Tennessee. Well, obviously you didn't pay attention to you didn't do much research, did you?
Yeah.
But thank you for being on. This has been wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Check her out. All the things will be in the description, like we said. Thank you very much, Laura. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.